Good day, Underdog podcast listeners. Jenny Mitchell here with an incredible underdog leadership story. Today, we're talking about transformational leadership, and the protagonist for today's story is a tennis club. And ironically, on paper, this tennis club should not have been an underdog. We are talking about an institution in Ottawa that's been around since 1881, if you can believe it, second oldest tennis club in Canada, 18 clay courts in the heart of downtown Ottawa with a pool, with a deck, with a beautiful clubhouse, almost 2,000 square feet. Just an incredible gem and a piece of Ottawa's history. And yet, this protagonist had many things mired in it, things like decades of conflict, a governance structure that was really not supporting it and really holding it back from moving forward into, let's call it the 20th, let alone the 21st century. It had an old story of scarcity, of the things it could not do, mostly due to membership and lack of money and vision, I would say as well. And also I laugh that it had a culture of eating its young volunteers for lunch. And we'll talk more about how when you support people, how the institutions and the organizations we lead will grow accordingly. So within this protagonist, within this story, in comes Jenny Mitchell, a young tennis player with young kids. I joined this club over 10, well, actually more like 15 years ago back then, and didn't really get involved in the leadership of it until later on as my kids got a little bit bigger. And as I really came to love the institution of this club. What did I love about it? Like, how can I situate you in the experience of the OTLBC? First of all, tennis is a great sport. It's a lot of fun. For those of you that love competition, you have that, but you also have the casualness and the camaraderie. So one thing I noticed about the tennis club was it fit all the Jenny Mitchell bills because it was community, it was connection, it was, playing hard, working hard. And I love the pursuit of excellence, but also that opportunity to have some fun and be silly and to move your body, which of course helps all those endorphins in your body. And then imagine yourself, if you will, and maybe I'll post a photo in the show notes for you of being in this 100-year-old clubhouse. The clubhouse itself was built in 1923, and you're up on the second floor balcony. You've got a beer in hand. You're with people that you enjoy. There's food, and you're looking out on 18 clay courts. We're talking about 5 acres in downtown Ottawa. And then the fact that it's a bike ride from my house, and that I really enjoy the people that I met there. One thing I remember distinctly when I first joined the club was how many incredibly active 50, 60, and 70, even 80-year-old people there were at the tennis club. And fun fact, if you didn't know this already, that tennis as a sport adds 10 years to your life. This is documented research from Health Canada, and it's the combination of the physical plus the social that makes it such a powerful, powerful sport to get involved in. And it's a sport for life. But I digress because I love this place so much. So that's the situating you in the protagonist of this story. Now I need to explain to you where we were at when I joined as board chair about 4 years ago. And we had just gone through a conversion which allowed us to be a not-for-profit in the true sense. And I won't go into all the details of the governance, but this was a fight that had been rife for over 60 years, and the club had sort of been hamstringed and stuck. And what it did was it really disencouraged investment in the club. So the club was kind of treading water. And if you look at its history, there were so few years along the way where the club was in the black. It had so many challenges with membership, really struggled to keep its identity. And ironically, it's called the OTLBC, the Ottawa Tennis and Lawn Bowling Club. And ironically, we no longer have lawn bowling, but we've kept the acronym because it's so iconic in the Ottawa community, in the Ottawa tennis community. So the other important thing you have to understand is this club has zero history of fundraising. You knew that when we were going to talk about transformational leadership, we were going to bring in the idea of fundraising. And one important takeaway for those of you listening to this podcast is the vision leads and the fundraising follows. the vision of where we want to be and how we want to become leads, and the money is the outcome of that. I think a lot of people get that wrong. They think that if we fundraise, we can make things happen. And I think fundraising is a byproduct of a group of people coming together to make something better, to cast a vision, to have that clarity of what we could be together with the support of other people who bring money to the table. And I think that's a really important takeaway. So as you tuck into this story, I want you to remember you have to want your dreams more than your drama. And this transformational leadership story of the tennis club really involves people coming together to say, what do we want to be when we grow up? How do we want to support that? And who can be on our party or on our team to make that happen? And I love Jen Sincero's line, there is nothing more unstoppable than a truckload of hell yes. And this is absolutely a story. Those of you leading in organizations listening to this podcast, showing people it's possible is part of your job description. I know it's not in the activities that you have on your job profile when you signed up, but casting that vision, showing it's an opportunity, and making people see it, helping people see it, and describing it in great detail, what it feels like, what it smells like, what it'll feel structurally like, what the balance sheet will look like when we're done. Those are all parts of transformational leadership. So I also want to situate my leadership in terms of the people who came before me, the board chairs and the executive directors that came before me, because none of us exist in a leadership vacuum. When we step into leadership at the hospital foundation or as dean of the department, there is a culture and a history that exists and precedes us. It behooves us to learn as much as we can about how things were done in the past, to provide context and opportunity for going forward. Notice I said to learn about, not necessarily to emulate or to participate in the old cultures and old narratives and old stories, but we have to know where we came from in order to know how we will move forward together. So in the past, we had board chairs that had done tough things, heavy lifting, sometimes I call it. One board chair had canceled lawn bowling. So we no longer have lawn bowling. We'd always had tennis and lawn bowling. That was incredibly divisive, incredibly contentious, and left a lot of people with a lot of bad feelings in their mouths. But remember, leadership is about making tough choices, and sometimes we are unpopular. Another board member, a board chair, had redone courts that were in terrible shape. And even though the balance sheet was terrible, and we really on paper couldn't afford the loan that was attached to redoing the courts, those board leaders stepped up and said, no, this is a priority. This is a core business operations of the OTLBC, and we're going to invest in it. And thank goodness they did, because when they invested in it, the tennis club players came. And then another board chair stepped up and fixed the governance process and moved us from, if you're ever a governance geek, very briefly, we were a not-for-profit with share structure, which isn't even allowed under the new not-for-profit rules in Ontario and in the Canadian not-for-profit rules. So we abolished the share structure and we converted to a true not-for-profit, which essentially we were operating as, but the shares were holding us back, and there were a lot of decisions that weren't made, including investment in the space, because we were not a full and true not-for-profit. So nowadays, when you walk into our tennis club, it is a member-owned club. We collectively vote on decisions to determine the future of ourselves and our assets, which is about 5 acres in a very nice and prestigious neighborhood in Old Ottawa South. So each of these leaders came before me. And of course, my leadership transformation, my opportunity to bring to the table was the idea of a vision for the future, which involved restoring our century-old clubhouse. And that, dear listeners, is my platform for today for a little bit of learning, a little bit of teaching, a little bit of inspiration, and a little bit of heck yes, we can do this. So The leadership and the fundraising, as I mentioned before, are often intertwined. The fundraising, the act of giving money, is almost like the trust. I trust your vision. I trust where you're going. I'm going to invest in you and keep me informed of your progress. And really, it's the money that follows the vision, not the other way around. Another analogy I've been given is that the tail doesn't wag the dog. In other words, if your fundraising is strong but you don't know what it's raising the money for, the wagging of the tail starts to move the entire dog versus the dog is where we're going, the vision, the leadership that's on board, and what's possible, because there always is priorities that need to be set. We cannot raise money for a black hole. You've heard me say this before, I hope. And this is like a compilation of Jenny Mitchell 101 sayings. People want to know what they're investing in. People want to know what they're donating towards. And most importantly, what will be different if I give you my trust and my money? So I'm going to walk you through the steps of this leadership transformation. It was a long process, but there are so many teachable moments in here that I really think it's worth diving into. So first off, I want to give you some language to support what I have seen in my years of experience as a consultant and as a coach in the stages of leadership. The first stage of leadership is awareness, which sounds a little bit like, oh my God, I'm managing chaos. There's 50 million things coming at me. How do I get a handle on this? That's the first step, which is awareness, noticing. The second stage of leadership is engagement, which is like, okay, I've got some systems, I've got some processes in place. I can kind of see how these things interact. And a few things are replicable, right? Rinse and repeat. That is where we want to get to. We want to be able to have renewable, I don't know, any not-for-profit that doesn't have, or any organization that doesn't want renewable revenue, right? That we can do the same activities and expect or hope to expect an outcome that is similar. So figuring out what you're good at is part of the engagement system. And part of the engagement leadership process is also, what are we not good at? What lanes are we going to play in? For those of you in the business world, this is your business model, right? What are we going to gracefully let go of, and what are we going to double down on? The third stage of leadership is visioning. It's this idea that we have a well-oiled machine. Everybody is on sequence, on par, and things within the silos are interconnected. I don't even want to use the word silos. Things within the systems are interconnected, and we know why, not what we're doing, but why we're doing it, and how those levers, some people like to use the word levers in our business, will inform and grow other pieces. And this gets really exciting, right? Everybody knows what the most important focus is. Everybody knows what they're working on. Hopefully there's some kind of a structure, a strategic plan, or a work plan where we can assess how we're doing at the end of that visioning session. Now, here's the funny part. Awareness, engagement, and visioning. And when you reach that new plateau, that new place of growth in the visioning, guess what? You go back to the awareness phase, because everything tends to change, right? We never stay the same, whether it's our leadership teams or the mission that we're delivering or the products. I don't know any company that just spits out the same products every time, right? We have to grow. Growth is part of our experience. And so that awareness, engagement, visioning cycle restarts, and we start at the beginning and we ask, what's most important? What can we replicate? And then where are we going? Within those three stages of leadership, when I was coaching, I was like, fundraising can feel like drinking from a water fountain. There's so many things you could do, right? And similarly, when you're driving and building a business, it's really tempting to say yes, or when you're leading an executive team, to say yes to everybody's initiatives. And so getting that buy-in on these particular dimensions that I'm going to speak to in just a minute is incredibly powerful for clarifying and streamlining what we're up to. So here they are, my personal take on the 6 dimensions of leadership success. And I'm going to caveat that with the lens I'm looking at is revenue based. You may have a job where leadership is not attached to a sales cycle, not attached to a bottom line revenue, not attached to creating XYZ and opportunities for your clients or whatever. But most of us, if we're in that senior leadership suite, we are in charge of sales or whatever the word is in your world. And so this 6 dimensions, I'd like to call them, are the 6 buckets that you absolutely have to keep an eye on as a leader. And if you ignore at your own peril is another word I like to use. So bucket number 1, you do not get to ignore it, is revenue. And my catchphrase for the revenue bucket is, the more you touch it, the more it comes in. If you are not prioritizing lead generation, if you're not prioritizing engagement, if you're not prioritizing inviting people in to buy your product, become a fundraiser, all those good things, then you will notice it right away. And so revenue has to be a priority. I see so many professionals getting bogged down in to-do lists rather than being engrossed in strategic movement. And strategic movement is, where will the next money for Q3, Q4 come from? Where are those future prospects? Where are those people that are going to support or buy our product? So I think revenue has to always be number 1. It's non-negotiable. I know in my own business, just for full disclosure and transparency, I have rules where I have to do my outreach. I have to work on my revenue file before I do anything else, because I can totally get super creative and do all sorts of fun things, or fill out my payroll or do my bookkeeping or all those good things. But those are things that are after revenue. Revenue has to be most important. So after revenue, what's number 2? The second dimension is people. We must focus on people. It's funny. I have been reading a lot of business books lately, and you can pretty much distill them all down to the fact that the people on your team are the most important thing. How you support them, how you engage them. And there's lots of different philosophies and all sorts of things. And of course, I'm introducing to the world the idea of underdog leadership, that when we support those incredible underdogs, the people that have overcome things, and when they join your senior leadership team, they are fantastic secret weapons, because they know what it's like to be on the other side, and they're so driven and passionate. So you have to find a way to cultivate a community of learners, not judgers. Learners want to feel safe to try things and to flop miserably. Judgers are like, see, I told you so. I told you that wasn't going to work. I knew that strategic initiative was a disaster. Why didn't they listen to me? We've all got them, right? We know what that's like, and you know how that has a smell to it. That kind of culture has a taste and a smell, and it will drive people away from your organization. The other thing on the people skills is that goes like across a bunch of different ways. People can relate maybe to your board of directors. People maybe relates to your staff. People maybe relates for you and to your volunteer teams. So there's a lot of different ways you can interpret the word people. And remember that people is not personal in the sense, that seems like an oxymoron, Jenny. Let me explain that. Often we can take feedback. I'm a big believer in feedback, because I just told you 2 seconds ago that we have to adopt a learner mindset. Where are our opportunities for growth? Well, in order to do that, we've got to be candid about feedback, giving feedback, making suggestions, challenging people to do better. Don't we all want to be involved in that pursuit? Sign me up right now, right? I'm not here in Chavender to become complacent and to do things ho-hum. I genuinely seek feedback, or in my terms, I love the word feed forward. How can I improve this next time? People have habits. I just want to speak a minute to the grumpies in the group. There will always be people in your community that would rather complain, that would rather find the problems and the challenges. And in my work as an executive coach, I have decided that those grumpies serve 2 purposes. One purpose is builds incredible compassion for me when I hear them. Because imagine how difficult it is to walk through life seeing that the entire world is against you, right? If you listen to them long enough, you will start drinking the Kool-Aid of the world is against us. There's no way we could possibly raise XYZ at the tennis club. No one will buy our new beer. We can't charge that much. I'm just using some simple examples, right? So that grumpiness really for me doubles down for me about underdog leadership to compassion and forces us to really, really listen and figure out what the underlying belief of that unhappiness is. And the second part is to never be so into yourself. And I say that with love, that you can't dismiss a good idea, because often when we listen to the feedback, there are components of it, there are pieces of it that we can actually incorporate. It takes very little effort. And if we had cut ourselves off or we had dismissed, notice that word, the feelings and the thoughts of others or those grumpy people, we might have missed out. So revenue, people. Number 3 is communications on our dimensions you have to provide a focus for. And this is that your words are your truth. The way you talk about yourself really matters. I'll never forget when we stopped talking about how we were so expensive. Oh my God, we're so expensive. That was a narrative that the tennis club had, because yes, we were more expensive than any of the other city-owned clubs. At a city-owned club, you were spending $150 and you had like 4 or 6 courts. And you could play on, they were hard courts. They weren't clay courts, which by the way is the gold standard, which are also very expensive to maintain. And for comparison, for my listeners, an adult membership at our tennis club is in the $1,000 a summer range. So just to clarify, it's $1,000 for the whole summer, but there are no additional fees. You don't pay every time you're on the court. It's a flat fee, and that gives you access to the pool, gets you access to all the courts. And so our narrative internally was, oh my God, we're so expensive. I hope people will renew, versus how do we own our value? How do we capitalize on our value proposition, which by the way has nothing to do with the people on the public courts. We can't even compete with that. That's not our story. That's not our history. So owning your story, owning your communications, and owning your own truth. And this can be really challenging as a leader, right? You feel like you're the only one in the room that can see the value of cancer care, the value of Export Development Canada, the value of the new stapler product that you've brought out, right? And we have to continue repeating. And finally, somehow, somewhere, people start to believe their truth. And that is an incredibly exciting leadership moment. Remembering that objections are masked values. So when you speak your truth, when you describe yourself in a certain way and people object or people bring up objections, that is a fantastic opportunity to go deeper, to clarify, to ask questions, and to leave that conversation with knowing what the underlying belief or objection is. Those are golden moments. And I think too many of us, or I know that underdog leaders do not turn away from those opportunities to engage, because we come out the other side richer, fuller, and with more knowledge. But it does require us to have a really strong backbone. I'm thinking of Brene Brown, strong back, strong back, soft front, warm heart or wild heart. That's really the way I kind of think about showing up for those kinds of conversations. And just a side note around communications, around the narrative of scarcity. You may be living through this as an underdog leader right now, that narrative that we don't have enough of X, enough of resources, enough of money, enough of access, enough donors, or this whole system is skewed or whatever it is. Or maybe you're trying to break into a new business market that it just seems incredibly steep, the learning curve right now. Take a look and ask yourself, is that narrative true, right? In the case of the tennis club, the narrative had been true. If you look at the operating profit loss operating for the last 25 years, you would see the majority of the years the club operating at a loss. Can you imagine how difficult it was to try and get volunteers on the board of directors to come on and address that, or even just lend their volunteer time to a sinking ship? So it was really important for us to say and to articulate, that was then, this is now, and to talk and to own the narrative. I think in some ways, to me, that's what brand is. And I'm not a brand expert, but the idea of owning who you are, owning where you're going, and owning your story and your narrative, and always being on the lookout of what will the next narrative be. And any of you who work in advocacy, there's that magical day when all of a sudden, where you've been repeating and repeating ad nauseum a bunch of key messages, whether it's about mental health or whether it's about access to services or the possibility of a new product. And all of a sudden it gets parroted back from the other side, either from your clients or it gets parroted back from the government if you're in the advocacy world, and they believe you and they take it on as a fait accompli and they believe your narrative and they see it as a truth. That is a magical day. That's a day you go home and you open champagne, people, and you say, the long play works. We are not in the business of changing minds in 3 months, 6 months. This takes time, energy, and effort. Remember that there is nothing more unstoppable than a truckload of hell yes. But when you have the vision for communications and you change how you communicate, things change around you. Ooh, that sounds like an executive coaching moment, right? Because all the time when I'm working with my clients, I'm talking about how the way they see the world is one way. And as a coach, you bring in the opportunity to see or ask the question, is there another way to see this story or this narrative? And when those light bulbs go on, new possibilities open up. And also that heaviness, the yoke of leadership changes because we see new potential. Revenue, people, communications, the next dimension. Oh, Nelly, there are books written on this. There are podcasts. There are TED Talks. I call it focus, right? Where your energy goes, where your focus flows. So the things that you pay attention to get done. The things you don't pay attention to fall off your radar. And there is a choice in that, right? That we love to tell people that we're so busy. And I'll have to do a whole other podcast on the idea of busyness and how I hate that badge of honor, because I don't know about you, but as a leader, do you want to go and talk to your shareholders or talk to your not-for-profit donors and say, oh, I'm so busy, or oh, I'm making so much impact? And how you control that focus is 100% in your control. That's a funny one. How you control your focus is 100% in your control, but it really is, right? So a couple of thoughts for you in this file, and remembering that you are in control of triaging all your work. Things don't happen to us. I don't believe that narrative anymore. I think I'm too old. I'm too cranky. I've been on this planet too long. Where we put our energy is what gets done. So how about we start owning that and putting some intentions behind it as leaders? That's something I spend a lot of time with my clients on, is calling bullshit on things, right? And I'm not saying that it won't all get done. It's not all going to get done maybe this week. So how can you focus on the most powerful things? One of my wonderful clients used the phrase, my high value tasks, or I like to call them power moves. What are the power moves that are going to move those files forward faster than you could possibly imagine? And also remembering where that excitement is for you for the week. We're not equally excited about all the files. Surprise, surprise. So capitalizing on that internal excitement to move things forward. And then the other hashtag I love to talk about is hashtag GEFN, good enough for now, right? So we can get hung up on the perfectionist tendencies. You're not going to know all the details. You may not have the perfect plan. At some point, sometime, someone, and it's usually a leader, has to pull off the Band-Aid, rip off the Band-Aid, pull out the plug and say, let's go. And accept that we will learn from there. And just a final thought on focus. Beware of moving the deck chairs around on the Titanic. I see a lot of people navel gazing, obsessing. Boards love to do this, right? Is this a decision we need to make now? Is this a decision we need to make later? How long are we going to talk about this? When we are moving the deck chairs around on the Titanic's going down, or something's going to happen. Are we adding to the conversation, or are we merely just circling the drain, and that energy and effort could be put into something else? I'm not saying is it a lost cause. What I'm saying is, how can we add value? And is this the place that we can add value? Last two, we're into the final dimensions of leadership success, and they're kind of intertwined. The last two are reporting and infrastructure. So reporting is all about the fact that metrics breed confidence and success. And in organizations, when I come in, I kind of see one of two extremes, right? It's a pendulum swing. We're tracking everything and everybody spends half their day tracking things and reporting, or we're tracking nothing and everybody's running around pell-mell, just in my case, usually it's going out raising money, or not following policies or whatever that is. And there's no perfect solution here, except maybe to be aware of right now in your organization, which part of the pendulum are you swinging? Are you swinging on over-reporting, or are you swinging on under-reporting? I know that at the tennis club, or for those of you that are working on big fundraising cases or fundraising strategies, it's really important to hold yourself accountable. So I'm a big believer in people determining their own metrics. What is it that's non-negotiable for you every week that you are going to do to make sure that you can put your head on the pillow at the end of the week on Friday night after a couple of drinks to celebrate all the work you've done, right? And how can you hold yourself accountable visually for that? So at the tennis club, for example, when we were in massive fundraising mode, we started putting the numbers raised right on the agenda for the board once a month. So you couldn't skirt away from it. You couldn't say you didn't know. We also did the same with the membership numbers, because those, member revenue, number one, are the other most important way that we make money every year at the club. There are other numbers, but they're more incidental. So we kept honing in on those numbers, making sure we knew them. And I don't mean just tracking them, but like asking ourselves, okay, so what are we doing in the next 4 weeks? I've heard people talk about 9-week and 6-week plans, right? With your bosses. I believe in that wholeheartedly, like sitting down rather than update meetings, right? You know how we have these weeklies or these bi-weeklies where we update with our boss, blah, blah, blah. We talk about the same things. I'm a big believer in, okay, so what are we going to accomplish in 6 weeks? What does that work plan look like? What are the headers? And I think we can really leverage our bosses as accountability partners. One of my big themes is, don't wait for someone else to hold you accountable. Decide what you want to do and go for it, and make a plan, right? And ask them to be your ally in it rather than them telling you what to do. Maybe it's just the fact that I own my own business and it drives me nuts when people tell me what to do. I don't mind if they encourage me or they challenge me on my portfolio, but we know that autonomy is an important component to employee success. Okay. So if you're with me on reporting, how we report, and the kind of metrics that we're talking about, then number 6 has to be infrastructure, or let's call it general support. So you can have the most amazing board of directors, the most amazing bunch of major gift conversations, and fantastic people and money coming in the door. But if your infrastructure is crap, if you can't track things, if you don't have a system, if you're not working with some kind of a database management or tracking or whatever that is in your organization, you've got a problem, because you're going to bring the money in and then you're going to look really bad once the money comes in, because you can't steward it. You can't follow the revenue. You can't thank people. There's just so many parts of that. So that's what I love about these 6 dimensions of leadership. So revenue, people, communications, focus, reporting, and infrastructure. They are all interlinked, dear listener. Can you see how they all connect, and how you have to make sure through that awareness, engagement, and visioning, how they all kind of tie in? Because they all have to be at the same place. You can't have all of them in awareness except having this kick-ass infrastructure that's like, $20 million a year for you, and you're not even capitalizing on any of those wonderful bells and whistles and features, and vice versa. You can be the most focused person in the world, but if you have no leads and no money coming in, it doesn't really matter. So I love this sort of example. And with infrastructure, I always remind people, a good tool informs today and tomorrow's decisions. So making sure you're buying the tools for your future growth. How exciting is that to say, right? To plan ahead for the growth you're going to have, or plan ahead for the programs you're going to have, or the products you're going to have. So these are the components. And it's been really fun to kind of teach this through this lens of my personal leadership journey at the tennis club. And so it feels, dear listeners, to kind of give you a little recap to say, well, how did we do? How would Jenny measure her leadership success? And I have just stepped down. I'm now past president of the board of directors. I was there for about 4.5 years. And I am delighted to say the original goal of our fundraising plan, the original target was $1 million, because we thought, oh my gosh, if we had $1 million in advance, that would allow us to put the stakes into the ground. In true transparency, you all know that the price tag on the project, what price tag on a project does not go up, that's the other funny part, is now increased. But we started slowly, and I think it's important to talk about that. We did the legwork on the case. You know, what is the case? Who are the people we want around the table? And the donations started to come in. Remember, best practice is to start with the larger gifts and the people who want to be in from the beginning. And when the money started to flow over about 2.5 years, I am delighted to be standing here to tell you we are officially at 1.4 million and counting. I say and counting because we're not done yet. Over 540,000 of that has come from individual donations. And I want to remind you, this is from an organization with zero history, not one. Well, I shouldn't say that. There were probably little gifts along the way that nobody knew about, but no history, no track record of charitable giving. And so to have $540,000 worth of people who said, I trust you. I like this vision you're proposing as a board. I'll come along with you and invest in this future for the club. That's what we're doing. There was Heritage Canada money that came in, and between all the other grants and some of our longtime sponsors, we are at $1.4 million. And really, it was the right vision and the trust that we really focused on. And to my point about the leadership buckets, communicating, even when there was nothing new to communicating that we had their backs, that we were thinking about them, that we were contemplating our next move. I cannot stress enough. I think people forget that leadership and fundraising are full contact sports. You will not get to where you want without spending time with people. And to me, and you know me as an executive coach, people are my jam. I find people fascinating. I find people inspiring. I find every single person on this planet has a unique perspective and something that I am excited to learn from. And the other final thing from a transformational journey perspective that I want to flag for everyone listening to this podcast is the transition from scarcity to opportunity. That smell of scarcity, we're stuck, we can't do anything, we have no money, we have no resources. It is palpable. And my response to that is, where can we make a change? What small things can we put in place? Sometimes they're not big dollar money amounts. The clubhouse itself actually ended up being a huge dollar amount. So that 1.4 million, just for context, is going directly into our century-old clubhouse. And in 2023, we will be celebrating our 100th anniversary on the site. So remember, we're established in 1881. So we're way older than 100 years, but the clubhouse itself, which is our new milestone, and we're looking to close out our final fundraising initiative by 2023. So moving from scarcity to opportunity. Yes, we made mistakes. Yes, it was messy. Yes, there were frustrations along the way. But, I am so incredibly proud of the transformational leadership journey that all of us at the board leadership table, our executive director, our volunteers, who slogged away, who supported this initiative from the beginning, casting a vision. It is your leadership responsibility. It is your job to show up with a bounce in your step. If that bounce is not in your step, take a pause. Figure out what you need tending, what needs tending in your body, in your head, in your mindset, so that you can show up as your best self every single freaking day. Whew. How's that for an underdog leadership story, eh? This one was personal, obviously, but these are the kinds of journeys that I have the privilege and the excitement to be a part of with my one-on-one coaching clients, with the people that are changing the world one mission at a time. And if this story has inspired you, get in touch. I'd love to hear about your underdog leadership journey or where you're going with your next underdog leadership story. And if you'd like some support, if you'd like some ideas or some brainstorming, you know where to find me. Jenny at chavender.com. That's Jenny Chavender Chavender like lavender, but with a CH at the beginning. So listen, dear listeners, it's been a pleasure here sharing with you the 3 stages of leadership. Remember them: awareness, engagement, and visioning, and those 6 dimensions of leadership success: revenue, people, communications, focus, that's your responsibility, people, reporting, and infrastructure. Have a great day. Go be great.